Good afternoon, what's up guys? Welcome back to the channel. So here's just a quick little snapshot of some stuff going on in the garage. It is a mess right now, so I apologize for that, but this is the 2006 R6 Raven Edition here. I've had this bike for quite a while now. And this right here is a project that I've been working on for undoubtedly much longer than I should be. This started out as a 1981 Yamaha Virago XS750 that I'm turning into a cafe racer project. So it's got 2006 R6 front end on it, triple trees, 17-inch R6 front wheel, inverted forks. Right now it has the R6 controls on it. And, you know, there's still a lot of work to be done up here with hooking everything up. The gas tank's going to be leveled out. I'm going to run no fenders, big fat tires. You can see the back end here, shaft drive bike. So it's going to be a fun little ripper, a little bar hopper when it's done. But it is taking a lot longer than it should be at this point. Everything else in here is kind of a mess, so I apologize about that. But we just moved in here not too long ago, and this garage is a little bit smaller than what I'm used to, so just trying to make do with the space that we have for now. But anyway, today I wanted to talk to you guys about a flip that I did recently. I work in a regular 9-to-5 job like a lot of you guys out there, so you know, 40, 45, sometimes 50 hours a week with overtime depending on what time of the year it is, what season it is, and how busy we are. But because of my automotive and mechanical background, way that I make some extra money on the side is I flip vehicles. So I buy them for a little bit of money and I try and sell them for a lot of money. A lot of times I buy cars that need engines or transmissions, and you know, I'll do those necessary repairs and I can sell the vehicle for, you know, sometimes $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 more than what I have invested into it, and that's the money that pays me for the time that I spent not only finding and getting the vehicle but also doing the work on it as well. Recently I did what ultimately has been the best flip that I've ever done so far. I've been doing this for about 9 years, you know, on and off as I have time and you know, the desire to do it. But this has been the best flip that I've done so far. It was a 2008 Ford Expedition, the limited trim package, so one step down below a King Ranch. So it had pretty much everything that you could get in a 2008 Ford Expedition. It was practically a Lincoln Navigator at that point. You know, it had in-dash navigation, flip-down DVD player for the rear passengers. It had third row seat. Third row was power, fold down, power, fold back up. Power lift gate in the rear would automatically open, automatically close. Power fold down running boards, driver and passenger side. So if you're familiar with you know, the amp steps that are out now that everyone has on their lifted trucks and everything, this was, you know, 11-year-old technology that Ford and Lincoln have been doing for a long time in their you know, upper model SUVs. So this Expedition had that as well. It had the 5.4 liter Triton V8, the 3-valve, which we'll get into here in a minute. But it was a 2-owner SUV. It was really, really clean. The previous owners that I bought it from had it kept in a garage. They've owned it since 2011. They really loved it. They took great care of it. And unfortunately, they had some issues with it, which led them to sell it. And ultimately, I was able to buy it. And we'll get into all that here in a second. I'll explain to you the premise on which I bought it, what we thought was wrong with it, what I did to determine what was really wrong with it, and how I fixed it, and what I had invested in it, and how much I sold it for, and we'll figure out how much money I actually made on that project. So hang tight and we'll roll that in a second. Alright guys, welcome back. I apologize in advance for the glare on my giant forehead here. There's a shop light right above us, and unfortunately it's either a lot of light or very little light in the garage right now. So I apologize in advance. You might need to wear your sunglasses for this one. But anyway, so in regards to the Expedition that I flipped here recently, again, it was a 2008 two-owner, really clean. It had 123,000 miles on it. So for the year, relatively low mileage, which is something that you want to look for in anything that you're going to flip for a profit. The higher the mileage of the vehicle, the harder it's going to be to sell, and ultimately, although you want to pick your flips accordingly when you buy them, you really need to pay attention to what your market's going to be and how big of a market you're going to have when you go to sell that vehicle. So something with 150 plus thousand miles on it, 200,000 miles, a lot of people are going to shy away from that. Even if it is a $3,000 or $4,000 car, you know, they hear 200,000 miles, 180,000 miles, and they're just going to look for something that has fewer miles, even if maybe it's a little uglier, has a few dents and scratches, or the interior's not as nice. To them, mechanically, it's going to be in better shape if it has less miles on it. So this had, again, 122, 123-ish thousand miles on it, which for an '08 is actually pretty good. You know, it's an 11-year-old vehicle, so that's about 12,000 miles a year, actually a little less than that, 11,000 miles a year. So, you know, that's right in average territory, a little bit less than average nowadays. But anyway, black leather interior, like a really nice silver metallic, deep metallic exterior. The exterior had a couple scratches and minor imperfections. It actually had one small rust bubble underneath the paint on the rear hatch, which was really popular on those body style Expeditions and Navigators, but the paint was still there, so there was no rust or anything coming through, but it was noticeable, and the buyer that I ultimately ended up selling it to was well aware of that. But anyway, it was not, you know, smashed up. It had a clean title. It had the nice wheels, 20-inch wheels. It had brand new tires on it when I bought it, brand new brakes, rotors, brake hoses. Had the AC compressor just replaced. I had receipts from the Ford dealership that it was serviced at for the last 8 years. Again, it was just a really clean example of a 11-year-old SUV. Especially when you get into like third row SUVs like that, a lot of families buy them with little kids, and little kids have a tendency to trash vehicles, spill stuff in the seats, mess up the carpet, kick the seats. You know, the back of the second row or the front row could be messed up from little kids kicking it with their sneakers and stuff. So this was just a really clean example. The owners, you know, took care of it, cleaned up after their kids apparently, and it was a prime example of something that you want to look for that had one major mechanical problem, which is why the previous owners were selling it, and I was able to scoop in there and buy it. So I found this SUV on Craigslist. I always use Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace, Offer Up and Let Go, those apps. They were kind of popular when they first came out. Now, not so much. Facebook Marketplace has really taken over for almost everything that's not on Craigslist. So I checked Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace. I found this Expedition on Craigslist. I had contacted the listing, you know, folks, the previous owners, within 24 hours after they posted it. They had several really good pictures, so they did a really good job advertising it for themselves. They had a nice write-up as far as the condition of the vehicle, service records, everything that was recently done to it, things like that. But ultimately, they had indicated in the ad that this vehicle, they were told, needed a new engine. So again, it had the 5.4 liter 3-valve V8, and it was throwing codes, misfire codes and camshaft alignment codes. So they took it to the Ford dealership that they've always taken it to for service. Ford dealership said, hey, you guys are most likely going to need an engine. It's going to cost roughly $10,000, and we suggest either replacing the engine with that cost in mind, or getting rid of the vehicle and buying something else. So they took it to a friend of theirs, a friend of a friend who has an independent shop, something like that, for a second opinion. That person told them the same thing. They said, hey, with these codes that are in it, it's going to need a new engine. So the folks that I bought the vehicle from, they threw it on Craigslist under the assumption that it needed a new engine. They were asking $4,000 for it. Book value on the Expedition with that kind of mileage was about $9,500. So they, a $10,000 quote for an engine. They had only subtracted $5,500 off the book value. So obviously I think they were assuming that someone was just going to put maybe a junkyard engine in it or something like that. Or maybe they were just aiming high and expecting someone to lowball them on the price a little bit. So I reached out to them. I was very polite, very punctual, thanked them for getting back to me as quickly as they did. And I said, hey, look, I'm really interested in this. I'm a cash buyer. I could come get it tomorrow. But judging by the book value of the vehicle when it is fixed and looking at what a new engine is going to cost, or in my case, I was looking at remanufactured Ford engines. I said I'd only be able to offer you $2,500 cash. I can pick it up tomorrow. So $2,500 is still a lot of money for a vehicle that supposedly needs a several $1,000 engine replacement, and that's even if I did it myself, which I would have done. But it was $1,500 less than what they're asking for it, and they had only listed it within the last 24 hours. So I said, hey, look, I understand that this might be your first offer. It may seem relatively low to you. If you want, hang on to it for another week or two, see if you get a better offer. And if you do, great. And if not, give me a shout, message me back, let me know, and my offer still stands. So at first they said, hey, thanks a lot, we appreciate it. We'll let you know. We're maybe going to trade it in on a new vehicle. We're waiting to see what the trade-in value is going to be. And, we appreciate the offer. We'll keep you posted. The very next morning, I get an email back, and they say, hey, husband and wife, we talked it over, and we would like to accept your offer, $2,500, if you can come get it. So that's what I did. I went and looked at it. It was everything that they said it was. It was in really, really good shape. Again, it had some cosmetic blemishes. Everything wasn't perfect on it, but all the bells and whistles that it came equipped with, being the limited trim package, everything worked. The running boards worked, the power fold mirrors worked, the power third row seats worked, the navigation worked, the DVD player worked, everything worked. And when I looked at it, the engine, this vehicle did start, run, and drive. I didn't drive it, but we did listen to it and let it idle in the driveway while I looked the vehicle over, and it sounded okay. The check engine light was on. I did not take my code reader to see what codes were stored in it. I basically went into this thinking, these people told me it needed an engine, the dealership told them that it needed an engine, and I'm going to buy it on the assumption that it does in fact need an engine. So if I can drive it home, that's great, saves me a $60 tow bill, but other than that, I was planning on putting an engine in it. So long story short, I came back the very next day when I could arrange a ride, and we transferred the title, paid them the rest of the money, and I drove the vehicle 20 minutes back to my house. When I drove it home, it was very sluggish on power. It was misfiring really badly, and I would have to shift it from drive to neutral when I would come up on stop signs or red lights, and kind of 2-foot it, hold 1 foot on the brake and the other foot on the accelerator to keep the RPMs up high enough that it wouldn't stall out, and then slide it back into drive when the light turned green and accelerate. Again, it was just sluggish on power, but other than that, it handled and drove really great. No other noises or anything like that. So I got this thing home, I checked it out, I looked into the codes. It had misfire codes all on bank 1, which is the passenger side bank, and it had some camshaft correlation type codes. So I cleared the codes, I looked to see what came back. Instantly, the misfire faults came back all on bank 1, and I had one camshaft correlation code come back. So I did the obvious things first. I checked the oil level and cleanliness. The level was good. It was not dirty. Could have started with an oil change, but I decided that that was probably not going to help my situation. So again, listening to this vehicle, assuming that it had some sort of timing chain problem, it did not have any timing chain noise. There was no slap or any noises coming from the chains indicating that it had a broken tensioner or a broken guide, which had allowed the chain to become loose and possibly skip time on bank 1 camshaft, because bank 2 was not misfiring and seemed to be running fine. So what I really wanted to do was, before I dug into it too far and tore the front cover off this thing and everything else, is I wanted to see if the timing chains had actually skipped time. So to do that, I took both valve covers off and I spun the engine by hand until the timing marks lined up with the indicators on both of the camshaft phasers. Now I assumed that if they lined up at the same time on the phasers, that they were still lined up on the crankshaft, although I could not see the crankshaft timing marks because the front cover was still on. But 9 times out of 10, if it's going to skip timing on these engines, it's going to skip at the phaser, at the cam, not down at the crank. So I rotated the engine by hand until both the phaser timing marks lined up in the position that you would put it back together in if you were assembling it with new timing chains and everything. And sure enough, the timing chains lined up on both phasers. So that was great news. That told me that it had not jumped time, which told me that most likely the tensioners and timing chain guides were not broken or damaged, that the chains had plenty of tension on them, and that there should be no valve train damage, like a bent valve or anything, due to the chains skipping time on the phasers. So that kind of narrowed it down to me as either a phaser issue, which is very common on the 3-valve 5.4s, or possibly a VCT actuator, which is what controls those phasers. So again, to do the phasers is a much more expensive and labor-intensive job. Even if you are going to do it yourself, the phasers can be, I think, around $300 or so for an OEM phaser. The VCT actuators are only about $90, and with the valve covers already off like I had them, it was one bolt to remove them, and you know, they were in and out. So what I did was I removed the VCT actuators just to see if there was any physical damage that would kind of lead me to believe that that most likely was the case. And what I had found on the Bank 1 camshaft actuator is this here is the actuator. Now I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this. We don't want to focus too well here. It doesn't look like. Alright guys, well, sorry about that. It's not wanting to focus for me, but anyway, this is the VCT actuator. So it has one electrical plug right here on the top. It has this one bolt right here, which is what holds it in, and this section right here is similar to a automatic transmission valve body. If you're familiar with that, there's a little plunger inside that moves and allows oil to flow in different ways and different pressures, depending on how it's controlled electronically by the computer. So around here, around this section, there's a couple little sections of screen, like just common like screen door screens. Okay, as it's being controlled by different throttle pressures and such, as you're driving, the screen can tear and the plunger can come out, and then as it goes back in, the screen can actually get stuck between the plunger and the housing or the bore of this VCT actuator, and that can actually cause the plunger inside to get stuck in that certain position, and then it will not allow the actuator to move, the plunger to move inside the actuator, which will not allow it to control the variable valve timing hubs or the cam phasers, as they're called on these Ford modular motors. So that does not allow the engine to advance and retard the timing the way it's supposed to. It will hold it at whatever area it gets stuck, and it will hold that whether you're at idle or wide open throttle or anywhere in between. And when I torn this apart, I had found a torn section of screen in this VCT actuator, which led me to believe that that was what happened on this truck. So I went to the Ford dealership. The Ford dealership actually that told the previous owners that this truck needed a new engine and quoted them $10,000 to do it. And for $90, I bought a brand new Motorcraft VCT actuator. I actually bought both of them because I had both of the valve covers off, and for an extra $90, the other one was probably not too far away from doing the same thing, assuming that they were both original. So I bought them both for $180, $90 a piece. I came home, I put both these bad boys in. I replaced the spark plugs. These are two spark plugs that I took out of the Expedition. This one here came out of the driver's side, or bank 2, and this one here, which it's really hard to see in the video because my camera's not focusing, but this one is very black and just very, soaked with fuel, whereas this one looks quite normal for its age. So all the ones on bank 1 looked black like this. All the ones on bank 2 looked normal like this. So again, all of bank 1 was misfiring, which indicated that this was, again, most likely the culprit. So I put both VCT actuators in, $90 a piece. I put all 8 Motorcraft spark plugs in. They're about $7 or $8 a piece, about $73 or so with tax for 4 new spark plugs. And then I bought a valve cover gasket set, which was about $43 or so, because obviously with the valve covers off, I wanted to replace the valve cover gaskets. So 2 new actuators, 8 new spark plugs, and a valve cover gasket set. All said and done was roughly $300 or so. At this point, I had paid $2,500 for the Expedition. I had paid about $150 for the title transfer, and I had driven it home, so I had no tow bill there. And then I had put about $300 into parts. I put everything back together, fired this thing up, and it ran like a dream. Okay, it ran beautifully. I hooked it up to my OBD2 scanner. I checked for pending codes. No pending codes. I let it idle and warm up for a while. Revved the accelerator a couple times, made sure that it revved out fine. There was no knocking, there was no noises. It sat there and idled beautifully. I drove it around the block in my neighborhood here several times. I did not register or insure this vehicle because it was a flip, and by not registering it or insuring it, I saved myself some money in the investment, which left more money for me to profit from on the back end. The downside to that is that I wasn't able to really drive it for a long distance or out on public roads, and if anything would have happened to it while I was driving it, or a tree fell on it or something like that, it was not insured, and I could have had a big paperweight on my hands that didn't run, and I would never be able to sell. So anyway, I took a risk on that, but that's the way that I usually do my flips. So I drove this truck around the block a couple times. I put maybe 10-15 miles on it, came back, checked the code several times, did this for a few days. The thing ran great. Okay, so I cleaned it up, washed it, wiped it all down. The interior was already clean from the previous owners. They cleaned it all up before they listed it for sale. I was the only one that was ever in it since then, and I didn't drive it as a daily driver or anything, so the inside was already clean. I cleaned up the outside. I had owned it for about 6 weeks at that point, just kind of working on it on and off in my free time, sometimes letting it go for a week or two while I was on vacation and stuff like that. So nights after work and weekends, few hours here and there, I may have had 16 total hours in it, maybe 2 8-hour days worth of actual time, all said and done, between going and getting it, researching things, tearing it apart, putting it back together, test driving it, cleaning it, everything. Maybe 2 days worth of a normal 8-hour day. So at this point, I had about $2,950 in this truck. Okay, just under $3,000. It was still a $9,500 truck. I cleaned it up. I listed it on Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace for $10,000. I had a guy, I had listed it on a Saturday night, okay, late Saturday night, probably 8, 9 o'clock or so, Saturday night. The following Sunday, the very next day, around noontime, I had a guy, local guy, reach out to me on Facebook. He had messaged me and said, hey, I'd like to come see this afternoon if you're around. I said, sure. He said I could be there around 2, 3 o'clock. Okay, he came over, he test drove it. I explained everything to him, what was wrong with the truck when I bought it, or what we thought was wrong with the truck, what I had done to it to diagnose it and fix it, what new parts were on it. He knew that I had not driven it a whole lot since I did the repair. Again, be very transparent. Don't lie to people. Don't put yourself in a situation where someone can, really be legitimately angry at you if something were to happen. Let them know everything, and if they decide to take a risk on it, that's on them at that point. They can be mad at themselves, but they can't really be mad at you. So I told him everything. He knew that I was just essentially flipping this truck. He didn't know what I had invested in it or anything, but he knew that I had bought it under the assumption that it needed an engine and that it ultimately did not need an engine. So he test drove it. Again, it ran beautifully. He was happy with it. He tested all the functions. It was great. He came back. He offered me $8,500 for it. At this point, I had only had it listed for less than 24 hours. And $8,500, although I was still stood to make a good bit of money, I think that the truck was worth a little bit more than that. So I countered his offer at $9,000. $9,000 would give me about a $6,000 profit for about 2 days worth of work. And he said that he accepted that offer. So he said he would do the $9,000. He wanted to come back the next day. Obviously, when the notaries were open, he wanted to bring his wife because ultimately the wife was going to be driving this expedition. He wanted to get her final okay on it and get to the bank and everything on Monday, get a cashier's check and all of that. So he came back the next day with his wife and a check in hand. He test drove it again. He got the okay from the wife, and we went to the notary, transferred the title, and now it's his. He drove it home 45 minutes back to his house in the next county, and I've yet to hear back from him. So no news is good news as far as I'm concerned. It means he didn't have any issues with it, which I didn't expect him to, but obviously, you always worry that maybe something would come up. I hadn't driven it for 45 minutes, so, just in case it had some other issue, but I had never heard from him, so I'm assuming that means that there was no issues. He's still driving it to this day, and I walked away with $6,050 in profit for about 2 days worth of work. Okay, so the thing to remember is you make your money when you buy, not always when you sell. Okay, by the cleanest example, I don't get into body work or anything like that, so I won't buy something that's got body parts falling off of it and stuff like that. It's got to look nice, the interior's got to be nice, all of the functions need to work, and if it needs an engine or it needs a transmission or it needs brakes or tires or shocks and struts all the way around, that's fine. I'll do that kind of stuff, and that's how I'll make my money. But this was, I really got lucky on this one. I bought it assuming it needed an engine. I would have made less money had I put an engine in it and then sold it, and I would have had a lot more time and money invested in it. It would have been a lot more work, and I probably only would have made $2,500 to $3,500 on it had I done it that way. This way, I had way less time in it, way less energy and money, and I made $6,000 on it. So $6,000, that's a great payday. That's a month's, 2 months take-home pay for the average person. And I was able to make it basically in 6 weeks and only really working on it for about 2 days. So anyway, there's money to be made out there. You guys, check your local listings. If you're mechanical at all and you have a little bit of space in your yard or your garage, you've got some basic tools and, a $70 OBD2 scanner from the local parts store, you guys can do this. Offer people what's fair. Don't lowball them. You're not going to buy a car most likely for $300 or $400 unless someone's desperate or unless the car's really junk. Buy cars that are only desirable when you're going to go to sell them. No one's going to buy a Chevy Cavalier So don't buy a Chevy Cavalier with a blown engine and think you're going to make money on it. Buy something that is desirable when it's fixed, that there's going to be a market for. Someone's going to want it. Maybe it's the top of the line version or trim package of whatever vehicle it is. In Pennsylvania, where I'm at here, four-wheel drive is great. Four-wheel drive vehicles sell really great. This time of year, we're getting ready for winter, so I knew that selling a big four-wheel drive like that would be an easy sell right now, and it was. It took less than 48 hours from the time I posted it for sale to the time I had a check in my hand and the title was signed over to the new owner. So anyway, again, there's money to be made if you're willing to work for it. Go out there, see what's out there. Don't watch TV all night. Get out there and do something to make a little bit of money, and get what you want out of life. Make it happen. So anyway, I appreciate your time, guys. Thanks for watching. I apologize. My camera wasn't focusing too well out here in the garage with this light. And anyway, thanks a lot for watching. I appreciate it. Stay tuned. Here in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be doing some more projects. I'm going to be bringing my camper home from storage. We're going to be doing some repairs on that before the final camping trip of the year. And we'll be doing some work on this Cafe Racer here as well, getting the R6 up on stands to be stored for the winter. So things are going to start happening here, and I hope to be able to bring you guys along on the channel and start making more content for you guys. So smash that like button, give me a thumbs up if you like the content, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.